Welcome to the Cannabis Equipment News Podcast. Hi, I'm David Manti, and welcome to a new episode of the Cannabis Equipment News Podcast. With me today is Drew Greco, founder of Green Star Cannabis Cultivation Service and Director of Cultivation with Solaris Farms. Thank you very much for joining me today, Drew.
Thank you for having me. I'm really excited to talk with you today.
Before we get started, please make sure to like, share, and subscribe to the podcast. You can also help us out a lot by leaving the podcast a positive review on whatever platform you use. If you want to email the podcast, you can reach me at david@cannabisequipmentnews.com with email the podcast in the subject line. You can also subscribe to our daily newsletter. Make sure you get it delivered to your inbox first. Drew, I always like to start with a little bit of background, and it's my understanding that you started out in the industry as a trimmer. What was day one like as a trimmer?
That was back in Colorado in 2012, so it was a whole different industry back then. It was before they voted in recreational. It was just a little medical grow, and we could just sit around the table in the barn that we were growing in and smoke weed and trim all day. So coming from North Carolina, it was like paradise, man. It was the greatest thing I'd ever experienced, honestly.
How did you land that job?
So I drove out to Colorado from North Carolina with my younger brother and two of our friends. We found a house up in Greeley, Colorado, which is in the northern part of Colorado. And I started working for a small hydroponic supply store. And there was a guy who owned a little dispensary and small grow in Garden City up in northern Colorado. And he would come in to buy his grow supplies there. And I just begged him for probably 6 months to give me a job trimming, and someone quit, and he came in one day and he was like, "Hey man, I just had a guy walk out, and you still want to trim?" I was like, "Yeah man, let's go." So I gave my 2 weeks at the hydro shop and went and started trimming with him.
Was it a slow climb up the corporate ladder, or was it a pretty quick move for you to becoming, founder, director of cultivation?
That was a slow climb. I got pretty lucky as, I started trimming for this guy, and within a month, one of his growers ended up quitting. So he moved me into the garden pretty fast. So I got lucky in that regards, but going from just a general laborer to even managing my first garden took me almost 6 years. I started at the very bottom in the gardens. At the first garden I worked at in Garden City, there was only two of us in the garden, so I did almost all of the tasks, but it was very, very small. We were only handling about 50 plants in the entire garden. So after about a year there, I decided I wanted to move down to Denver because that's where the big grows were, and rec had come online by this point, so I knew that things were moving in the direction of large-scale cultivation, and I wanted that experience. So I moved down to Denver, got a job at one of the largest grows in Denver at the time, and for 11 months, all I did was clean reservoirs. I would drain we had 75-gallon reservoirs on the floor, and I would drain probably 18 to 25 reservoirs a day, scrub them out, refill them, and that's just all I did all day long.
It seems like you knew what you wanted, but you were kind of willing to do anything to get there. Is that what motivated you when you had sort of these entry-level jobs? Just you kind of saw what was coming down the tunnel?
Yeah. There were guys that are in my position now that I was really looking up to at that time, and I knew that if I just, put in the work, grinded, showed that I had love for this plant, that I had a brain on my shoulders, and that, I could do this, that I eventually would get my chance. And, it took about 6 years, but it finally came.
Who were some of your mentors?
So early on, I worked for the second garden I ever worked for in Denver was Rob Janey. I still give him most of the credit for teaching me how to grow at scale. And it's funny when I think about it, because the garden that we were in at that time was large for Denver, but it's not scale anymore. but still, I use a lot of the practices that we did in that garden. He taught me a lot about plant health, uh, environment, and the way a plant reacts to temperature, humidity, BPD, and even irrigation schedules. So I credit him with a lot of that. One of the second people I worked for was Corey Buffkin at Greenman in Denver. And, he's still crushing it. He has Greenway Medical here in Las Vegas that he runs, and he still has grows in Denver also. I'm pretty sure he has a couple other grows up in Oregon and a couple other states also. So um, yeah, I was very lucky in Denver that was where there were a lot of large scale growers, and I could learn from some guys who really knew what they were doing.
At what part of your journey did you realize you had a green thumb?
I knew before I even got into cultivation. My mom was a master gardener in Virginia. We had plants all over the house and all over the property my entire life growing up. So I was not unfamiliar with plants, just I'd never really seen cannabis.
What was it that drew you to large scale cultivation?
um, I honestly, when I first got into cultivation, I didn't really want to go that large scale. My dream was having, like 30 lights, something that I could just run by myself. But around 2015, 2016 in Colorado, the bottom really just started falling out. Pound prices were below $1,000, and they just kept going down and down and down. And at that point, I realized that it was going to be a lot harder to survive doing something small scale, and craft, I guess, would be the definition for it. Definitely not impossible, but I think it'll be a lot harder for those types of gardens to survive in the future. Um, Also, a lot of the managers that I had at these large scale gardens were incredible growers, incredible people, but not good coaches, not good leaders. And coming from a swimming and a sports background, I coached all through high school and parts of college. So I knew that I could marry those two things and be very successful at running crews in large scale facilities. And that's just been where my head is at for probably the past 6 or 7 years.
As a manager, what are some of the things that work for you that make you a successful leader?
Being in the garden every single day. I try to lead by example. If the guys are in there cleaning the room, if as long as I have time, I'm in there right there with them, squeegeeing the floors, trying to scrub benches, bleaching all the drip stakes, all the grunt work that a lot of the managers that I had in the beginning wouldn't step up to do. I'm right there with them, and I think that fosters an environment where they know that they can trust me. They know that I have their back no matter what, and that helps us bring the team to different levels.
No, I definitely agree with you. I think there's something to be said about being a manager, but also having boots on the ground to lead by example. I really do agree with you there.
Absolutely.
So,
It's hard to lead a team from an office, especially a team that's doing the kind of work that a cultivation team is doing every day.
so you've worked in Colorado, California, Massachusetts, and Nevada. Which of those states would you say was the most difficult to work in?
Um, I think Massachusetts and Nevada are pretty tied as far as their testing regulations for microbials. Um, and when it comes down to it, that's really the hardest part about growing cannabis legally right now is being able to pass those microbial tests, heavy metals tests. Um, and Nevada and Massachusetts, I think, still have the most stringent regulations for that microbial testing.
What are some of the things that you do that help make sure you're passing some of those tests?
We do a lot of preventative sprays, and then just our PPE and our cross contamination SOPs and procedures. As soon as people come into the building in the morning, they're going straight to the locker room. the shoes that they wear outside are going into their locker. They have a pair of shoes that only stay in the building. We have to go through a small airlock before you can actually get to the head house of the greenhouse. We have not 70% ISO bottles staged everywhere throughout the greenhouse. So if you're going from one room to another, you're spraying your shoes down, spraying down your suit. Everybody wears scrubs. There's hand washing sinks everywhere. And then cleaning is just scheduled into our daily tasks every day. So we use a lot of quaternary ammonia. We use a lot of ISO to disinfect and then quat to sanitize. So, we're sanitizing our surfaces at least once a week, and most of the high traffic areas we're doing every single day.
Can you ever clean too much in a facility?
No, not at all. I don't think there's enough time to clean too much in a facility. If you were cleaning too much, you probably weren't growing anything.
So where do large scale grows need the most help in your opinion right now?
Probably with environmental control. When you start getting into those huge rooms and huge bays of greenhouse, controlling the environment is a little bit tricky. And a lot of the data and the research that people are designing their grows off of come from either vegetables or flowers. And it's not the same biomass as a cannabis plant. A cannabis plant, especially when you're putting thousands of plants into a room, that transpiration is way beyond anything you see from a lettuce or really any kind of cut flower that you would be growing inside. So it's taken a little bit of catching up to people had to fail a lot and then learn from those mistakes and spread the information. And that's where I think the biggest changes are starting to come around, and that's where people need the most help for sure.
Well, that's one thing that I was interested in is that I saw that you did a lot of remote management of facilities. How are you able to sort of make sure that these grows in different areas, likely of the country, are kind of going down the right path, not making mistakes? And how are you able to remotely manage those simultaneously?
It's getting much easier with the control platforms and the AI that companies are coming up with now. I've remote managed 2 facilities, and I'll say 2.5 because the large greenhouse I was at last year, I was definitely there almost every day, but I took a couple of vacations. I went to Spain for about 14 days, and I remote managed the facility from Spain for the 2 weeks that I was gone. So it is necessary to have the proper equipment. You need sensors everywhere in the room. You need multiple sensors in every room to get an accurate view of what the room is doing at all times of the day. You need your irrigation system to be on control, and you need to have a way to control that from your phone or from your computer from a remote location. But what I was doing is I would wake up every morning, I'd log into my account with either GrowLink or TrollMaster, whatever was controlling the garden that I was using. Prevo was the one at the greenhouse last year. And I'm checking every single zone, making sure that we're in the parameters of where we're supposed to be for the environment at that time of day. Double checking the irrigation, making sure that all of the irrigation events happened when they were supposed to. I can go back and look at the pH and the EC of every single irrigation shot that was sent to make sure that was in the right set points. And then having someone on the ground there who understands cannabis cultivation, who has been in the facility for at least 6 months and kind of understands the equipment in there. And then I'm in full contact with them throughout the day. Usually if they have any questions about tasks that they're doing, they can FaceTime me. If they see a weird color on a leaf or discoloration or a type of bug, they can take a picture or they can FaceTime me and we can talk through it and figure out how we're going to combat it. And then if there's, any kind of huge problem that pops up, I can hop on a plane and be, pretty much at any garden in the country within 8 hours. So.
Okay. In your opinion, are companies, operators willing to spend the money that it takes to put these sensors and other equipment into the grow rooms in order to make sure that, kind of everything is maximized for the space?
It's People are starting to see the benefit of it now. Yes, the past 2 years it's been really hard, especially with the economy the way that it has been. After that last stock market kind of crash that happened, it's people have been tightening their belt buckles. It's been very, very hard to get owners to come out of pocket for anything. Most places, have been even struggling just to buy the necessary supplies to keep the doors open. So for the past 2 years, that has been very hard, but people are starting to see the benefit of it. We're kind of starting to come out of that hole that we've been in for the past couple of years, and from what I'm seeing, people are starting to see money again, starting to turn a profit, and starting to invest into their buildings and their equipment that they have in those buildings.
When you're faced with those types of budgetary restrictions, how do you change your day to day just to make sure you're getting the most out of your grow?
Going back to the roots of, what I was doing in my basement, and, I had zero budget at that time. So, finding things that we already have in the facility that we can either get working again or kind of use to carry us through until we have the money coming in to invest in the new equipment. But usually when I take over gardens or am consulting with a garden, it's yes, they need help with the environment, but the environment is good enough that we can be profitable. Really, a lot of these gardens need help with their SOPs, their workflow, just scheduling, being able to maintain a consistent schedule of loading plants into rooms and harvesting plants and not having too much downtime between when you harvest and when you can load the next room. That's really what I see most of the large scale gardens need help with. It's And again, that comes back to these growers that are only growing small amounts of plants in their basement and then get the chance to take over these large facilities and don't have the understanding of the scheduling to keep it moving and keep on a perpetual system.
Is part of that just growing pains, or is that, people being a little bit out
Sure.
over their skis?
A little bit of both.
Yeah.
I mean, I don't think there's a single perfect garden in the entire world. There's always going to be something that is limiting, and the job of a good cultivator is to recognize where the limits are in the facility and balance out all of the other factors so that you are still giving the best environment that you can to these plants.
So if there's no single perfect garden in the world, in your opinion, which one comes the closest?
Ooh. And again, this is just, from watching videos online, probably my top three. I think the garden in Sacramento that Miami Mango just built for an indoor facility is as close to perfect as I've seen. The greenhouse that David Polly with Preferred Gardens just built, also in Sacramento, I believe, it just blows my mind at what he's doing in there right now. He just had his first harvest, and to me it looks perfect. I'm sure he's very critical of it, but for a first harvest, that was very impressive to me. And then there's a guy in Humboldt, I believe his name is Luke. He's Turk Mansion on Instagram, but his greenhouse is in his backyard, man. He has a house, And then he built just a beautiful mixed light greenhouse in his backyard. So he wakes up every day and just rolls out of bed and goes to the greenhouse. And man, that's like my dream. So
Right. That doesn't sound like a bad setup.
no, not at all.
One thing that I saw you mention a lot, particularly online, are your proven SOPs. So can you run us through some of these proven SOPs and just kind of like, even if just a few of them that are the low hanging fruit for some of the other growers out there?
Yeah, sure. My first and very foremost thing if I take over a new garden is we do not prune and veg. My belief is that once you flip a plant into flower, the hormones and the auxins in that plant change. The plant can heal itself a lot faster in flower than it can in veg. My thought is that if you prune more than 10% of a plant in veg, it takes at least 3 days for it to recover, sometimes 4 or 5, depending on strain. If you do that same amount of pruning in flower, that plant is going to heal itself in a day or two. And when we're doing perpetual harvest in a large scale facility, the number of harvests per year is key. If I can shorten my veg time, I can get more harvests per year. So I don't touch plants in veg. I only prune them in flower. This speeds up our veg time. I'm only vegging plants for about 24 days, and then they go right into the flower room. Pruning in flower on day 7, giving the plants a little bit of time to adjust from that transfer shock from going from veg to flower. And then on that day 7 prune, really only taking off nodes and branches that are under the first layer of trellis. I do a slight defoliation in the middle of the plant at that time, really just taking off main fan leaves that are attached to the meristem. And then we do a slightly heavier defol on day 21. Indoors, I did a lot heavier of a defol than I have in the greenhouses. The plants kind of need those leaves to be able to regulate their transpiration and keep themselves cool, especially in the summer here in Nevada when we're battling that 120-degree afternoon heat. I think leaving more fan leaves on those plants helps them a lot more than it would us removing them. And then irrigation schedule. Using drybacks to steer your plants either generatively or vegetatively, and use heavier drybacks at the beginning of your flower cycle to stack node sites, promote the plant to start its flowering phase, and then switching back to a vegetative type irrigation schedule for bulking in those middle weeks, and then flushing the plant I just use half strength of my nutrient recipe for week 8, and then week 9 quarter strength for half of that week, and then RO for like the last 2 days before we flower.
Have you ever had pushback from other people within the company regarding these SOPs?
Sure. And I love, healthy discourse, and it obviously depends on who the pushback is coming from and what kind of experience and I guess data that they can show me to say, hey, this is why we want to do it this way. Because I have, 5 gardens that I have come in and either consulted with or managed that have run these SOPs and have been successful. So I know that this works. I know that there are tweaks that you have to make for each individual strain, and as we move down the line, these SOPs will mature and they'll change for each individual facility. But that's a very basic starting point where I start at every single facility, and we have successful harvests from that. So I know that if I come into a facility and I just stick to what I know we're going to be successful. And then once we are successful and everybody is in a good spot and understands what we are doing and can see the changes in the plant and can see the responses in the plant from what we were doing, then we start making more changes and we start trying to implement new techniques and different ways to even bring it to the next level. But you have to have that solid baseline first before you can start trying to drive a Ferrari.
Well, I think that's that's a characteristic of a good leader, is that you have your proven SOPs, but you're willing to adapt to the situation.
Yeah, absolutely. I always bring it back to the Dunning-Kruger effect. The more that you know, the more you know that you don't know. So I am always open to learn, and I don't think I would be successful if I wasn't.
No, that is certainly the truth. One thing that I read is that you had mentioned that your SOPs are scalable to 400,000 square feet. Was that just what you chose, or is there a reason that you picked that number?
No, the greenhouse that I managed last summer was 9 acres, 400,000 square feet.
Okay. So do you think it would be scalable beyond that? You're just saying that you know that you've proven it up to that point.
That's just what I've done. But yeah, I don't see why it couldn't be scalable past that. The problems you run into scaling even to that 400,000 is labor and automation. You either need a significant labor force, which costs a lot of money, or you need the automation to be able to do the labor that those people were doing.
Okay. You mentioned the automation, and then you also mentioned the AI tools that you use as well. What are some of those specific AI tools that you couldn't live without, and some of the automation that you're talking about as well?
So that I think AI is going to be a lot more than it is in the industry right now. But I mean, I consider any of the sensors that are collecting data and making changes to your environment based off of what they are reading. I consider that AI. So, any sensor that's in your room and says we're at 85 degrees right now, turn on the AC, or we're at 90 degrees, shut off the lights. Like, I consider that AI. So that I can't live without. Any kind of irrigation control, I can't live without that. There are some new companies coming out. There's a cool company called Neatleaf that does a camera that they can put into your rooms, and it can 3D map, and it has AI capabilities to detect nutrient deficiencies and bugs and pathogens and stuff like that. I think that that's going to be a huge tool for large scale cultivation just on the IPM scouting side. With the greenhouse I was running last summer, we had 10,000 plants in each zone. So sending one person in to scout that zone is like looking for a needle in a haystack. It's almost pointless. So having AI that has better eyes than people and can easily detect problems almost before they occur is going to be huge.
Well, I think that's a really good point, is that for the longest time, we've had this data, right? But it's always been the problem with big data is just like, okay, now I can't manage it. But I think that AI makes it smarter, is if built correctly, can be more intuitive in terms of like crop steering, other decisions that you make in the grow that you otherwise maybe wouldn't have thought of, just because it's drawing from a greater pool of resources.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, you think about these control platforms for your environment, they're taking temperature, humidity, light intensity, and your irrigation times and putting them all into one graph. And they're taking that information like every 3 to 5 seconds. So, I mean, just imagine trying to compile all of that data by yourself. And they put it out on a beautiful chart for you. You can go back years and years, and it's pretty amazing.
I was curious about what you do when it comes to buying new equipment. What is your equipment procurement strategy?
It depends on the size of the equipment. Something like, for instance, we just bought a Trollmaster Aqua X plus an irrigation control board. That was like $1,000. So all I have to do is put in a purchase order request to the director of operations. He goes to the CEO. It either gets approved or they say, no, we have to wait. And then I go to whoever we're ordering that piece of equipment from and make the purchase. Something like all new lights or like a real high-tech fertigation system that's going to cost us a couple $100,000, then we're sitting down with the company that we're buying it from. They're meeting our CEO. We're talking about ways that we can pay them up front and then do some kind of financing or something like that. That's usually the process that we're going through.
So how did you come to your new role as director of cultivation of Solaris Farms?
I got pretty lucky, actually. A buddy of mine that I've just known through the cannabis industry online for a few years actually started at their Solaris' production license up in Pahrump. It's about 45 minutes from here. And he posted on his Instagram that they were looking for a director of cultivation. And in December of last year, the garden that I was working for last summer ended up shutting down. It was just way too big. They didn't have the automation and they couldn't afford the labor force that they needed to keep that thing running. So they shut down in December and I was looking for a position. They needed a director of cultivation. So I sent them my resume and it luckily worked out.
What's it like being a part of a company as it comes to an end? Is it trying to do whatever you can to save it, or did you sort of see the writing on the wall?
It was both. I loved the lady that I was working for. I think she was an amazing human being. I was with them for 11 months, and for I think at least 10 of those 11 months, they were looking for investment. And they had people that were coming in. I was giving tours to all these different groups, and they were really just kicking the tires. And after 10 months of people looking and not wanting to put money in, I could see that it just wasn't going to happen. But at the same time, I loved that greenhouse. What we were doing in there, a lot of people said that it couldn't be done. And that was a great feeling to produce really high quality, clean cannabis out of that facility when everyone was saying that it couldn't be done.
Yeah. So I guess to be more specific, what were you doing that other people said couldn't be done?
Just that large scale. When I took over, especially the way that greenhouse, the shape that greenhouse was in before I took it over, they were failing microbial tests. I think about 70% of the product that they were testing was failing. They had completely shut down the greenhouse before I started, took all of the plants out, did a deep clean, replaced all the irrigation lines because they had biofilm buildup in them that was leading to reasons for why they were failing these microbial tests. So just the history of that greenhouse and the history of what had been produced in it before, a lot of people were telling me not to take that job.
So how long did it take you to right the ship? And is there a part of you that kind of just wishes you had a little more time?
I really wish we had more time there. Absolutely. So the guy who was running the greenhouse when I got there, John Capretta, he's an amazing grower. He's really good with systems. He graduated from Penn State with a greenhouse degree, a degree in greenhouse. I'm not sure if it was greenhouse automation or I can't remember, but he was running Priva. He knew everything about the chiller park and the boiler system and how to control the vents on the roof and use the heat pipes on the floor to push the humidity out of the building throughout the day. So he had them in a really good spot. He it was just too much for him to stay on top of all that and manage the crew day to day. So when I was hired, I was literally just hired to run the crew and run day-to-day operations. So it took a lot off of my plate, not having to worry about the environment and not having to worry about the irrigation. I would, tell him if I was in a room, hey man, it's 5 degrees hotter than I think what we wanted in here, and he would do his thing on the computer, and the greenhouse would just respond to what he was doing. So that put us in a great position. About 2 months after I started, I think he had been with the company for a while, and I think he could kind of see the writing on the wall. So he resigned and stayed on, luckily for me, kind of in a consulting capacity. And he taught me Priva. He taught me how to control the greenhouse. And it took about 2 or 3 months of having him on the phone, for a couple hours almost every single day, answering my questions about, if I do this on Priva to heat the heat pipes up this much, how much air is it going to push through the vents, or how many degrees do I need to have the vents open to fully exhaust this whole house. He really, really helped me with that. And after that, by that time we had gotten through the summer months. It was coming into really good growing season here in Las Vegas. Cooler temperatures, but we still have pretty good sun intensity, September through November. And we had some pretty amazing harvests come down September through the end of October. And then by that time, it was a little bit too little too late, and they just couldn't hold on.
How do you keep, the pulse of new technology in the industry?
Websites like LinkedIn, Instagram, the cannabis community online is, I think in general, really good about sharing new techniques and new technology that's coming around.
Do you go to trade shows at all?
Yeah. I actually just went to the indoor ag show here in Las Vegas a couple months ago. And I guess regrettably, really the only trade shows I've been to have been MJ Biz or I can't remember the name of there was one in Colorado that I used to go to all the time. But the indoor ag show here in Las Vegas is amazing. I would definitely recommend that to any cultivators, greenhouse or indoors. It was a lot smaller than MJ Biz, and it was real cultivators there. It wasn't, the glitz and glam and celebrity of MJ Biz, where you're walking around to a lot of people that don't really know what they're talking about. It was real cultivators, real people that work with cultivators and understand cultivation. And I came out of that conference with a lot of new information, and I was really happy about that.
So when you're at a show like that, are you more like kid in the candy store, or are you more like, oh, if only I had the budget?
Both. Both. Walking around pretty wide-eyed at some of the technology and things that people are introducing, and then thinking, oh man, I wish we had the money to spend on this right now.
So, in your opinion, what is the perfect recipe for cannabis?
Whew. It's got to include love. That's the one thing that I've seen at every facility that I've been in. If there's a bunch of people there that are just doing it for a paycheck and really don't care about the plant or the product that's coming out, it's going to show in the product that they produce. You get a team that really cares about what they're doing, cares about the plant, and cares about the product that they're putting out to the customer, then it's going to show.
Okay. So you don't want to give away the secret sauce.
I mean, there really is no secret sauce. I use Front Row Nutrients. I use EvoCore Cocoa. You can see it on any of my pages. I don't run secret recipes. Like the mix chart that they give me is what I'm feeding my plants. I use Impello Biosciences Continuum for microbes. That's it. I really
Okay.
don't think there's like a secret nutrient sauce or a secret input that anybody is using that is giving them more THC or more terpenes. If you're giving them the right environment, if you're growing healthy plants and you're drying and curing it properly, you're you're going to be in a good spot.
So in your 12 years, is there a particular grow or end product that you would consider your crowning achievement thus far?
Um, I wouldn't say crowning achievement. There have definitely been batches and test results and flower that has come back that I've been very, very impressed with. Um, our Sunset Sherb that came out of the greenhouse in October of last year hit 30%. We had 3% terpenes. I forget what the top three terpenes were on that strain, but if I'm in that 3 to 4% terpene and 25 to 30, I'd say above 20% and 3 to 4% terpenes, then I am happy with that product that is going to the customer.
Okay. When did you start posting every Tuesday? Is it Triked Out Tuesday?
No, I can't take credit for that. I'm pretty sure that was Nick Scalfani who started that one. Um, but I like the hashtag. It's I've had a page on LinkedIn for almost 10 years now. Yeah, like 9 years now. And the cannabis industry really just got on LinkedIn like last year. It really just blew up last year. And so seeing people on there that are really posting pictures of flower and, promoting what they're doing, it's been awesome. So yeah, that's a cool little post to do on Tuesdays.
One thing that I've noticed about the industry is how collaborative it is. Do you feel the same way? Is there a lot of collaboration? Are you working with a lot of your colleagues in terms of how you could collectively do it better?
I'm trying to. That's one of the biggest things that I think is kind of lacking in the industry. You see it in certain parts, and I really think that the people that are successful and are going to be successful moving forward are the people that are making the right partnerships and are helping to promote each other. You see a lot of people that are very protective of their IP, but they're doing the exact same thing that the guy down the street is doing. Um, if if they were talking to each other and promoting each other, double the people would know about what they were doing. And I think that there's enough room in the industry for us to share that space. I don't think we all need to be fighting over it.
So I know that as a director of cultivation, there typically aren't enough hours in the day to do the job that you want to do. But do you find any time to look at the legislative side of things and, how legalization efforts are going in the United States?
Not Probably not as much as I should. I follow the headlines and I'll dig into stuff a little bit at times, but I mean, right now from the whole Schedule 3 thing, all I'm seeing is a lot of fear mongering and, people saying that all the medical programs and recreational programs are going to get shut down and big pharma is going to take over and but I've heard all the same things every time a rec state voted for recreational cannabis, and that hasn't happened. I mean, weed was federally illegal before the state started making their laws. I really don't see any state taking back the millions of dollars in taxes that they're getting now just because it's rescheduled. Um, but then again, I'm not a politician and I don't really know the the way those laws work. So I mean, maybe it gets rescheduled and everything gets shut down the next day, but I don't see that happening.
Okay, so maybe not on the legislative side of things, but how would you describe the state of cannabis cultivation right now?
Um, in a good place, but it's on a slippery slope. It's going to become more of a commodity. It's just inevitable that that is going to happen, and the price per pound is just or per gram is just going to keep going down. The cultivations that have strong teams, strong SOPs, efficient workflow, efficient SOPs, those are going to be the farms and the companies that thrive and make it in the future. It's going to go the direction of big ag. There's going to be some small craft facilities that have good following now that are going to be able to stay alive, I think, but it's going to be very few and far between. There's going to be huge grows, and they're going to be pumping out a decent product that can be sold anywhere.
As it becomes more of a commodity, do you see yourself staying with those large grows or potentially going back to the craft side?
It depends on what opportunity arises. I would love to have my own small license where, I could have a crew of under 20 people and still make a profit and still produce good cannabis. But from what I've seen in the states that are going legal and allowing licensure, it's almost impossible to get a license in states now. I grew up in Virginia, so I've been watching the Virginia legalization unfold as close as I can. And, you have to have, it's like a $60,000 non-refundable application fee. You have to own the building before you apply, and it has to be in a zone that is zoned for cannabis cultivation. So, if you live in another state and are trying to go back to the state that you grew up in, it's going to be very hard because I don't have property there. I don't know a lot of people that have property there. And if I do, what are the chances of them having property in a zone where we can grow at? And then what are the chances of there being a building there already that we could grow at, or anyone giving me or throwing in with me on the $60,000 that they could just lose if we don't get a license. So that the regulations make it really hard to open up a small cultivation just in general right now.
Well, Drew, I really do appreciate you taking the time, and I really do appreciate you sharing your insight with the Cannabis Equipment News listeners. Before we get out of here, is there anything else you want to make sure the CEN audience knows either about yourself or your work with Green Star or Solaris?
No, you guys can follow me at Green Star Grower on Instagram. Just Drew Greco on LinkedIn if you guys are on LinkedIn. You can follow Solaris Farms on Instagram. We don't have a lot of new content up right now. We're starting to do a rebrand of the brands that we carry and that we are producing out of the greenhouse at Solaris Farms. So you can follow them and just pay attention. We're going to be dropping a whole bunch of cool stuff this year.
Is there anything that you could share in particular that you're really excited about?
We don't have signatures on the contract yet, so no. But oh man, there's a good partnership in the works with a very well-known strain that has been around for a very long time. So.
Well, if and when that news breaks, please let me know so we can make sure we share it with the audience.
I will, absolutely. Thank you for having me. I had a great time.
All right, Drew. Well, before we get out of here, please make sure to like, share, and subscribe to the podcast. You could also help us out a lot by leaving the podcast a positive review on whatever platform you use. If you want to email the podcast, you can reach me at david@cannabisequipmentnews.com with email the podcast in the subject line. You can also subscribe to our daily newsletter. Make sure you get it delivered to your inbox first. For Drew Greco, founder of Green Star Cannabis Cultivation Service and Director of Cultivation at Solaris Farms, I'm David Manti. This is the Cannabis Equipment News Podcast, and we'll see you next week.
Welcome to the Cannabis Equipment News Podcast.